On South Asia. Welcome to the podcast produced by the Department of Modern South Asian Languages and Literatures, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg.
Hello, dear audience of On South Asia, and welcome to a new episode. My name is Deborah Sinner, and I'm a student assistant. In this episode, you listen to an engrossing conversation between International Booker Prize winning Hindi writer Geetanjali Shree and literary critic and moderator Claudia Kramatschek, a specialist in the literatures of the Global South. Recorded in November 2025 in Heidelberg, the discussion was organized by the South Asia Institute to mark the publication of the English translation of Shree's 1998 novel Hamara Sheher Us Baras, translated by Daisy Rockwell as Our City That Year. Set against the backdrop of rising communal tensions and religious fundamentalism, the novel remains as urgent and resonant today as it was nearly 3 decades ago when it was first published. We hope you enjoy this rich and thought-provoking conversation on issues that shape not only contemporary India, but our world at large. Just as a last information before we start with the episode, the conversation between Shree and Kramatschek included readings of some parts of the novel. We kept one of it for the episode for giving you a glimpse into the book.
You grew up bilingual. Hindi is your mother tongue, but you completed your school education and your university studies in English. Did you ever had a moment in which you thought, should I switch to English as an author also?
I mean, a lot of you would be familiar with the history of India, which has been colony of the British for a very long time it was, and that gave it a certain kind of education system which completely screwed up our minds. And we in some senses lost both languages. We never learned English well enough to be equal to the British, and we lost our connection with our own mother tongue. So it was a very skewed development. So bilingual, yes, but in a very odd sort of way. So that is how a lot of us who had the facility to be educated, that is how we grew up. But I think people like me were able to turn this to their advantage. And this freedom from a stranglehold of a conventional education, it just allowed us to get quite inventive with our language. And I think that is shown in English as well today. I mean, Indians writing in English are writing in the most innovative way, and perhaps the British won't like to admit that that is anything to do with their language. It is, so it is an Indian language now, and I think they're doing it, it's more colorful and powerful than anything Queen's English could do.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think something similar happened with the mother tongue when we chose to make it our vehicle of expression or our mode of expression. That I never had a conventional education in Hindi, but that just, it made me ill-educated for a long time, very aware of my ill-education, but it also made me go to it in a completely new trajectory. And I think it allowed me to be very playful and eclectic with my language. So, did I at any point think that I could switch to English? I think it was the other way around, because my formal education was in English, that was a medium. I think it seemed more natural for me to go to English and write in English. Why did I choose Hindi, or why did I sometimes say I didn't choose it, it chose me? So I think the choice was really this. I mean, why Hindi when I have English, which is the more privileged language, which is the language which will take me to a larger readership and a larger market. I mean, one was not thinking of any of this. But that's precisely the point. These are not the things you think about when you're writing. You think about which language is, or which mode of expression is really going to allow you to speak the way you want to do. And I think the mother tongue, even if you've not grown up in it formally, is the one which is closest to your bones, is the one which is somewhere coursing in your blood. And almost without my realizing it, I was not making a nationalistic statement when I decided to write in Hindi. I think it just came very spontaneously that this is the language in which I have to tell the stories about India.
We are talking about Our City in That Year. This was published in 1998. A German translation, Unsere Stadt in jenem Jahr, came out in 2013. And I said already, it deals with the alarming rise of religious fundamentalism in India at that time, the erosion of what we would like to call secular India. We are in India in the early 1990s in a small town that remains nameless until the end of the novel. And as in the rest of the country, Muslims and Hindus have lived there more or less peacefully for centuries. And as in the rest of the country, at that time, Hindus and Muslims suddenly start to fight each other. There are attacks, assaults, curfews are imposed. In other words, nothing is the way it used to be in that town. And I would suggest that we start with the first reading part and then we go into our...
Okay, but will you allow me to just...
Definitely, I just wanted to ask you,
in
yes,
response
definitely.
to what you're saying?
Yes.
I mean, I think, like I said, I mean, this is the only... I mean, there are different impulses which get writers to start writing books. But this is the only one where I was really looking at what was happening around and getting disturbed by that. And when I say I actually mean many other people of my sensibility. So we were disturbed at what was going on, and I thought it was so oppressive that I also wanted to get away from it. I thought I could not write about it, but it was so pressurizing that I thought there was nothing else I could write about. So I have to try doing this. So that is how this book began. But it also, I think there was a sense of great despair and shock at what was happening in the country, because Hindus and Muslims, the two major religious communities in the country, had been living together for centuries, and of course there had been conflict and there had been friendship. It had been an up and down relationship always, but I think there was some important fixity there that they were seen always as belonging to one space. It was like a family, and fights within the family, staying on together within the family, ugliness, venomosity, everything, but all within the family. And then, of course, there was the traumatic event of partition, which cannot be underrated. I mean, it was completely inhuman and it was so horrendous. And for the first time, on a religious basis, two peoples were divided and not divided. Therefore, it is not over. It continues. Partition sits in our midst all the time. We live with that. We have memories of that. Some of us have direct experience. Others just feel the trauma of it all around. So it actually did not resolve anything. But it also coincided with the period of a new India, which was an independent India. People of my generation belong to the new India, which had just come into being, and there was a lot of idealism, and there was a lot of liberal, progressive ideas, secular ideas, ideas about equality, gender, religion, everything, mutual respect, and all the things that people like me have grown up on. And what happened in the 80s and 90s? That suddenly people like me were becoming more and more marginalized, looking more and more stupid, out of sync with society. And religious fundamentalism was suddenly becoming the stronger force. And the horrible thing for people like me was, and again, when I say I don't mean just me, was that we somehow made this divide between the illiterate and backward India and the liberals and the progressives. So the intellectuals, artists, writers, we belonged to some other category. And suddenly, what we thought was only that side of town, in the backward part of the town, and not in our universities and thinking places, suddenly it seemed that this divide was an artificial divide, and the same language was being spoken here. And I think that was the real shock which I felt that somehow I have to try and deal with. And that is how this book got started.
As mentioned before, you'll now listen to the readings of the novel, first in Hindi, then in German.
दद्दू बताएं, श्रुति उनकी तरफ मुड़ी, आप कितने मुसलमानों को जानते हैं? दद्दू की चोंच फिर निकल आई है, आगे को सरक कर पैर नीचे रख दिए हैं, एक घुटना दूसरे पर मोड़ कर बैठे हैं। हमारे गांव में ही थे बहुत से मुसलमान परिवार। चलो आज तुम्हें एक बात बताता हूँ। तुम लोग आए दिन ढाबों रेस्टोरेंट में खाते हो, कौन जाने बेरे लोग किस जात के हों, उनके हाथ का छुआ पकाया बेधड़क खा लेते हो। रेलगाड़ी में, बस में किसी भी संप्रदाय वाले से पकौड़ी कचौड़ी खरीद लेते हो, मिल बांट कर बैठते हो, छुआछूत नहीं मानते हो। और तो और तुम लोग हिंदू मुसलमान में ब्याह भी रचा रहे हो। हमारे गांव में इस सब का सवाल ही नहीं उठता था। जलसों त्योहारों का हाथ साथ होता और तमाम अनुष्ठानों में दोनों का मिलकर उठना बैठना, मगर नाश्ता पानी अलग अलग कराया जाता। पूरे गांव की बात कर रहा हूँ। मैं तो जल्दी ही इस अलग अलग के हिसाब से अलग हो गया, मगर तब तक मुसलमान के घर जाता तो हिंदू लड़का हिंदू हलवाई की दुकान से मेरे और मेरे पिता के लिए पत्तल के दोने में खाने को लाता। पिताजी और गांव भर ऐसे ही रहे। हमारे घर में तामचीनी के बर्तन थे जो मुसलमान मेहमानों के लिए ही रखे हुए थे, और इन बातों का हम में से कोई बुरा नहीं मानता था। तुम भेदभाव नहीं करते, हम करते थे, मगर हम हिंदू मुसलमान में भी कहीं ज़्यादा अपनापा था। बता चुकी हूँ कि मैं क्या नहीं हूँ, बस कॉपी करने वाली हूँ। जो सन की प्रक्रिया है जो मुझ पर भूत सितारी होती और एकदम से उतर जाती है। लिखते लिखते बंद कर देती हूँ, मुंह फेर लेती हूँ, कहीं और का लिखने लगती हूँ, और तब लगता है कि जो सामने हो रहा है वो हो चुका है और मैं रिपोर्ट कर रही हूँ बीते की। जैसे सामने का घटता मन में अतीत बनकर फिर कलम से फूट रहा है पल भर में। कॉपी करती जाती हूँ, पर यह भी नहीं समझती कि हूँ कि थी। वाह रे दद्दू, श्रुति ने एक और तिलपट्टी उठाई। गांव गांव की रट लगाएंगे, और अब जब लेकर आई हूँ गांव की चीज़ तो मैं ही खा रही हूँ। हंस देते हैं दद्दू। गांव में पॉलीथीन में पैक होकर नहीं मिलती, ऐसे ही ढेरियाँ होती जिन्हें मक्खियाँ खाती और हम भी खाते। अब मक्खियों का बहाना, श्रुति जीत की आवाज़ में कहती है। खैर, दद्दू कहते हैं, अब इससे असली गांव नहीं मिलेगा। शुक्रिया।
Bevor ich das Deutsche lese, muss ich ganz kurz wenigstens sagen, dass hier die 3 zentralen Charaktere vorkommen, die Shruti, Hanif und Sharat heißen. Und für den indischen Leser ist sofort klar, dass Hanif ein Muslim ist und Sharat und Shruti eben nicht. Hanif und Sharat sind gute Freunde und Shruti ist die Ehefrau von Hanif. Außerdem kommt eine 4. Figur vor, Dadu, der Vater von Sharat, bei dem die 3 wohnen. Das nur als Setting, bevor jetzt ich den deutschen Teil lese, in der Übersetzung von André Penz. Sag mal, Dadu, Shruti hat sich ihm zugewendet, wie viele Muslime kennst du eigentlich? Seine Lust am Reden war wieder erwacht. Er sitzt auf dem vorderen Rand des Divan, hat einen Fuß auf den Boden gestellt und die Beine überschlagen. In meinem Dorf gab es mehrere muslimische Familien. Komm, ich erzähle dir etwas darüber. Ihr seid es gewohnt, in Dabas und Restaurants zu essen und stört euch nicht im geringsten daran, wenn euch etwas von einem Kellner serviert wird, von dem ihr nicht wisst, zu welcher Kaste er gehört. Wenn ihr mit dem Zug oder mit dem Bus fahrt, spielt es für euch keine Rolle, bei wem ihr die Pakoras kauft. Ihr sitzt mit den unterschiedlichsten Leuten zusammen und haltet euch nicht an die Kastengesetze und zu guter Letzt gibt es in euren Kreisen Hochzeiten zwischen Hindus und Muslimen. In meinem Dorf war daran nicht im geringsten zu denken. Wir haben zwar Feste miteinander gefeiert und hatten auch sonst viel miteinander zu tun. Die Mahlzeiten haben wir jedoch stets getrennt voneinander eingenommen. So war es im ganzen Dorf. Ich habe mich zwar früh davon distanziert, aber bis dahin hatte immer ein hinduistischer Junge das Essen für mich und meinen Vater von einem hinduistischen Händler auf einem Teller aus Blättern gebracht, wenn wir bei einer muslimischen Familie eingeladen waren. So machten es alle. Für unsere muslimischen Gäste stand bei uns ein ganzes Set Emaille-Geschirr bereit, das von keinem anderen angerührt wurde. Niemand störte sich an diesen Dingen. Ihr diskriminiert heute keinen mehr. Wir haben es getan. Aber dafür gingen wir entschieden freundlicher miteinander um. Jetzt stell dich doch nicht so an, Shruti griff zum nächsten Sesamplätzchen. Ständig redest du von deinem Dorf und wenn ich jetzt etwas aus deinem Dorf mitbringe, bin ich die Einzige, die davon isst. Dadu lachte. Im Dorf war es nicht in die Plastiktüte eingeschweißt. Dort stand es überall offen herum. Zusammen mit den Fliegen sind wir darüber hergefallen. Versuch dich jetzt nicht wieder mit den Fliegen herauszureden, sagte Shruti siegessicher. Also gut, gab sich Dadu geschlagen. Die Dörfer sind auch nicht mehr das, was sie einmal waren.
Vielen Dank. Thank you. Martin Gieselmann had already spoken about the characters, Shruti and Hanif, a couple, both intellectual. He teaches at the university. Hanif is befriended with Sharat, who's a Hindu and also a professor at the university. And then we heard it, there's also Dadu, Sharat's elderly father. And the whole novel is told through the eyes of these characters, through their perspective. What do they stand for? Why did you choose these characters?
Again, not deliberately, but since my concern and my anxiety was about precisely these people, these kinds of people who think they are above religious differences. I mean, Shruti is Hindu and she is married Hanif, and they are a very loving couple. The religion is not in any way a source of tension between them. And Sharad is also somebody who holds very liberal views. So for me, it was important to see it was a kind of soul searching that it allowed of the secular mind, because it seemed that it was secularism which was failing in those years. So what is it that these people were not grasping? What is it that they were just being too idealistic about and not realizing that it was not making sense to the masses? Where were they cut off from the masses? So it was really to get a feel of that experience that my characters had to be like this. But Daddu is slightly different. He's in some senses the freest of them all, because he's not even trying to talk in this idealistic language. He's always being sarcastic. He's always saying, you're wasting your time. What's the problem? India has a population problem. Let them kill each other, we'll have that many less people, to handle, and the country will become better. Why are you getting so upset about things? So he's always saying ridiculous and politically very incorrect things as well.
Absolutely.
He's doing all that. But in fact, he stands for a kind of unity and pluralism of the country, which, again, these people would consider the real value of that country. A pluralism which the religious fundamentalism was eroding and trying to change, wanting to make it as monocultural as possible. So I think Daddu stands for somebody who's representing that pluralism. The poetry he recites, the songs he sings, the things he says, and even in this passage when he says that you are the ones who are talking about erasing religious difference. We never tried that. He's talking about his own youth and childhood, and he said we kept separate utensils for friends from the other religion, but we did it with great respect, and they didn't mind it and we didn't mind it. And you go around saying that you don't believe any of this, and there's much more of Hindu-Muslim going on in your time. So he's making points of that kind, which are both sometimes teasing, but sometimes also quite incisive and perceptive. So I think it made sense to have characters like that. But I think here I would like to add that everything is actually not just being told from their perspective. I think there's an important other character in this novel who's the narrator. Often in books, the narrator is the invisible author who knows everything. And I think what is important in this book, what is different, is that the narrator does not know everything. And I've often, this evolved as I was writing. I didn't work out a formula that this would work. This is going to, be a good strategy. But I think it evolved that the narrator was somebody who's somehow present in many places, but not omniscient. And the narrator doesn't really know what's going on, doesn't really know what's important and what is not, and only feels the tension in the air, the tension that these characters are emanating. I think that tension concretizes into a narrator, and she decides, even if she cannot analyze, what she'll do is just copy everything, because there's some urgency in the air, there's some storm whipping around, and she must quickly, record it all. She must be some kind of a witness, record what she's hearing, record what she's seeing, even in a completely disorderly fashion. And perhaps someday there'll be some analyst who knows what's going on and understand what happened, what went wrong, and find the right direction. So, and I've had certain conversations with people who asked me, why a narrator like that? And I think it emerged from the conversation. It's quite interesting, what happens, when somebody suddenly throws your words or your decisions, back at you, and then you think, why did I do that? So I didn't do it deliberately, but I think it works wonderfully to have somebody who doesn't know. Because if somebody doesn't know, then the person is open. It's almost like a child has hope, will not be cynical, will not already tell the story, will be ready to hear and see other things, new things.
As a reader, I think, who's familiar with the history of India, especially in the 20th century, one might assume when we start to read this novel that this is a novel about the destruction of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, which happened in 1992. And even for me, who is not living in India, it was really a shocking moment. And it was, I felt it's a turning point in the history of India. And we've seen what was following. You only briefly allude to this event in the novel. So what kind of impact did it have? Because I felt that this novel is more kind of, you mentioned the word soul search, more a kind of psychological study. How could this happen?
Yeah.
That we lost track in such a way.
I think that's what the novel is about, really. And not with an answer, unfortunately. But that is what it is probing. And as far as the demolition of the masjid goes, as far as any other event goes, I think that's there. Growing religious fundamentalism is the backdrop of the entire novel. And as you said, there's somewhere a little mention of a mosque that was demolished. But I think almost never is literature about a specific event. It is more about the phenomenon. It is much more about the atmosphere, which is, building up in such a way that such events become possible. So I think it is about that atmosphere. It is about the experience of people who thought that they would be able to stall that atmosphere, who thought that things like this will never be allowed to happen. It's about what they are going through and their sense of crisis and failure and soul searching and a very, very disturbing discovery that they also have latent prejudices and ideas of the kind they thought they had freed themselves completely of. So what this soul searching of people of this kind led to was just a breakdown that they were witnessing of the world around them, but also a breakdown within them and a breakdown of their relationships, which till then was full of humor, full of understanding and empathy for each other. Suddenly they could not make jokes with each other. Suddenly they were noticing, suspecting each other. I mean, at some level, what was happening on a larger scale was happening in their personal equation as well, and spilling over into their personal equation. And that was the really, I think, the tragic part of these events in the world. I mean, I also want to take this moment to say that when I wrote the book, I was obviously writing about something that I was seeing happening around me, but people often ask me, the book came out in English last year, the English translation came out last year, and they say, how do you feel after so many years, returning to that book? And I say, I mean, I'm really disturbed because, sometimes when a book is that old, and 2024, the book comes out in English, and you think you've written something way back, you must have moved ahead, and instead you discover that you have, in fact, it's not dated, it's extremely relevant even today, and worse, you don't have it just in India. I mean, religion as a weapon, religion to divide peoples, nations being formed on that basis has become almost the natural order of today's world.
So I also felt it's not just about an Indian town. It's really a book about global phenomena which we are
today,
facing much more even today. What stays with me is the sentence, nobody was interested any longer in the history books. Yeah. And it's Hanif who always tries to tell his students when they are, catched by the rumors, he tells them, read the stories, read the history. It's there, it's documented.
Yeah, because there's a challenge to the history which was being taught in the university by the history built of rumors, built on the street by hooligans. So it was coming out of that. So there were so many stories of the other kind which were completely ignored. For instance, pluralism. For instance, the friendliness with which communities would live. I mean, all that was being set aside. This was giving some kind of other fulfillment. It was like the mobs, out there now making history and teaching history. And what the professors were teaching in the university was too boring and didn't make sense and didn't satisfy. So at some point, I think in this book, a rumor or a pamphlet being, floated around that Gandhi was killed by a Muslim. Now, everybody knows who killed Gandhi, what happened. But this was such a satisfying thought. So it was like that, people were there, sitting there to lap up lies because it just gratified some side of theirs. which had somehow been today activated. And that is what was so dangerous, that is what was so despairing. And that is what is so dangerous and so despairing.
I mean, for erect dictatorship, the first step you do is
Yes, of course.
erase education,
Yeah.
so that people and their emotions are just a puppet in
That's
your
right.
hand.
Whip up hysteria.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like living in such time, living in these times we are witnessing now, you can't be neutral. Even the silence is a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning you said that as a writer you can't close your eyes, especially not in these times. So would you say that in the end any sort of literature is political in the sense that you take a side and you have it in your hand at which side you're putting yourself in regard to the world and to the conflicts going on?
Well, I think this would happen at different registers, because I think at one level, a writer, unless a writer, there will be some who are ideologically driven, and they would be very clear that they want to write literature from this side about the downtrodden for this purpose, etc. Whether you talk about Premchand or you talk about some of the Gorky, or writers like that. But I think there's another position that a lot of writers would have, and perhaps that's more widespread, where they would want to be detached. They would want to have that distance and not be associated with any particular side, and be able to try and unfurl whatever reality or imagination or whatever moment they are laying out in those pages. They would want to do that with a certain neutrality. But this is only a desired position. I don't think it means that they are actually neutral. It would creep in. So some of your values, your proclivities. I mean, you can't be. I don't know. There's nothing like being a person without subjectivity. So definitely, but I think an author would try. I mean, any author worth the salt would try to also imagine something which is not herself. Would try to be in the skin of the other, if you will, and I think it may be incomplete, but that is where there will be sensitive reaching out, a sensitive possibility, a possibility of a dialogue, a possibility of understanding another point of view, not just yours. And I think a writer would try that, even if she's failing at various points.
Especially that would be for me the political act of literature, that you try to take on the perspective of the so-called other.
I think so. Yes. That's important. That is very important. But of course, I mean, there will have to be points beyond which you cannot keep your. I mean, murder is murder.
Yes.
You cannot say that I can justify that. But I think a writer would try to perhaps unravel what's leading up to that kind of completely inhuman act. That would be the attempt of the writer.
You've listened to an episode of On South Asia, a podcast by the Department of Modern South Asian Languages and Literatures, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg. Have a look at our other episodes as well. For topic wishes and feedback, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find our email in the description.